Hi, everybody. I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centers, and the host for today's session of the third edition of the annual Cosmic Conference, all about the employee experience. We are coming almost to the end of our conference. We have 2 more days to go, but we've spent the last 3 weeks trying to better understand how to design great employee experiences, looking at different lenses from strategy to execution across channels, to employee engagement, and so many more topics. Until October 21st, we still have 2 more sessions in addition to today's. Tomorrow, Jonathan Yeo will be joining us to talk about identity at work. And then on Friday, we have Breeze Dong, who's going to talk to us about applying systems thinking to transformation and change in a 14,000 person organization in Roche. So I hope you join us for those. If you want to check out the times or sign up for the sessions, you can go on our website, cosmicconference.com, and you'll be able to, or is it cosmiccentersconference.com, and you'll be able to see all of the upcoming sessions as well as the previous ones. The team will share that link for you in the comments. Today's guest is a regular on all of our conferences and all of our center stage, because in fact, Joe and I have been having one or many conversations for years now. And every once in a while, we let you guys peek into one of our conversations. Let me just quickly introduce Joe for those of you who don't know him from previous sessions. So Joe's an affiliated professor of practice in global management. After spending 20 years in the managerial world, he moved from Italy to INSEAD and devoted himself to scholarly work, a dream from his youth. Joe's research and teaching focuses on the management of multinational enterprise, particularly on the management of global integration and global innovation. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about. I announced yesterday when I was sharing what the next session is, that you and I would have what I call a philosophical conversation. Not, we've done a lot of down to earth, execution focused things. But today we want to elevate our discussion a little bit. And what we'll be talking is a bit more conceptual. We're going to talk about the concept of the firm, not in its legal definition, but rather in its, management practice. Like, what is the firm? How do we understand it? What have scholars written about it? And why is it important to the future of work? And then we'll also be talking about a topic that is very close to both your and my heart, which is a discussion around the importance of history, culture, geography in the future of work, and explore more deeply how these things are interconnected to our organizations. So I hope I did the good introduction, but we'll see where the conversation takes us in any case. And so we're just going to start by a definition. I just want you to start by defining, what do we mean when we say firm, so that everybody's on the same page.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Marilyn, for inviting me, for having me on the Cosmic Conference. Just the idea of being in the cosmos is pretty amazing. Cosmos is a very nice place to be. This is the only one where we can't go to another one, whatever the technology we have. So the word firm, of course, is quite used for centuries. And it's important that we, first of all, understand that it's not used with the same exact meaning in every country. We're using English, so I'm going to assume that we are in a place where English is the language. And if we talk with people that are in business, or any citizen for that matter, and if we read scholarly work by economists, by institutionalists, the firm is an entity, is an abstraction, is an entity or an artifact, if you will. And it's always related to this idea of business. And originally, by the way, the word firm, and it's important, I would argue very much important to go back to the original meaning of words. As you know, I'm very keen on that. Firm, of course, means firm, means solid, not liquid. And I just want to make a reference here to Zygmunt Bauman, because the Polish sociologist and philosopher who has done amazing work, recently deceased, he did amazing work on trying to explain to us what the, let's say, the second half of the 20th century has been or was, which is one characterized by what he called the liquid world, i.e., a world with confusion, with a world with anxiety, a world full of uncertainty, a world where the past, at least for my generation, the past was solid. We knew what we could expect. We were on firm ground. And suddenly, because of globalization, because of technology, now because of a pandemic, we all feel to be in a very, very unsafe place, in a very liquid place where we can't stand firm. So to start with, a firm should be that. A firm should be firm. And I think for us humans, something that is not real, not material, is not firm. Dreams are great, but dreams are not firm. Imagination is wonderful, but we can actually live out of imagination. Or at least I think people like me, i.e. normal people, cannot live out of imagination. It's part of our amazing ability to have and this feeling of happiness or achievement or motivation. But, well, we need more than that. We actually need, for example, the peace of mind to be able to imagine, to be able to dream, and then realize our dreams. So firm is that. Of course, and I don't want to keep our conversation too much on my side, because I also want to hear your views on a number of things, as we usually do. But so firm is that, right? So the firm originally, of course, in Italian, also in Latin. By the way, in the old Republic of Venice, when Venice was like the Silicon Valley of the world then, many years ago, terra firma, firm, was the piece of Venice that was the continent.
Right.
So the Venetians living on the island of Venice and those islands around, that are actually not very firm, as we know, thought that the rest of the continent, the continent where they had most of its land and peoples in those days, 1,000 years ago, 800 years ago, 700 years ago, they thought of that as, actually mentioned that as terra firma, firm land, which was crucial for them. So yes, I do think that firm needs to be dealt with like that. Now, in the modern sense, when you go to business school, for example, or you study economics, a firm is treated more like a nexus of contracts. Mm-hmm. It's like a contractual form. You sign a contract, you enter the firm as an employee, for example, or you sell something to the firm and you enter into a sales agreement with the firm. So a firm is seen in an abstract fashion, in an alternative to a market. But it's interesting, a market used to be also a place.
Physical, yeah.
To go to the marketplace. And firms were firmas. Firmas means signature in Italian, in Latin. So a firm is also a business house that has a name, and usually the name, of course, in the old days, the name of the people that founded it, that owned it. It's still true, by the way, in many quote unquote knowledge-based firms, like consultants, like legal firms, where often the name of the founders or the name of the key partners are the signature, the brand of the firm. So we have this past meaning of the firm as an establishment, as a house, actually, the business house. And now we have more of an abstract, very rational idea that the firm are contracts, that the firm are ways of transacting that economize relative to the market when market fails. But the market is also now an abstraction. So there was a lot that we have lost by making things abstract.
I wrote down a bunch of things that I want to deep dive into. So actually, first of all, your mention about dreams are great, but we can't progress inside of them reminded me of a Woody Allen quote where he says, "I hate reality, but it's the only place I can get a steak."
Yes, indeed.
Which is, I think, a really nice quote to kind of, materialize this, which is in the end, if you want to get a steak, you better stand on firm ground. And I think that, you and I both, one thing we always agree on is we love a good definition, and we love a good exploration of the origins of words. Um, in the same way that firm means solid, or originally comes from something that you can touch and see, and that is in the physical material world. You and I also wrote about the office at some point, and somehow even the opposite of that, which is that the office started off being a role, a job, and then became a physical space. And so I want to maybe put those two contrasting movements, right? The firm that became liquid, the office that became solid. And in the context of today's discussion, in the world, around whether the office is dead or not, whether physicality matters, the fact that we can, set up remote organizations and not have a headquarter, and, all of these discussions, not to mention discussions around the metaverse and what it's going to bring into the world. I'd love for us to have a discussion about like our perspectives on this kind of liquefaction or not of the place of work. Later on, I'll want us to talk about, the knowledge view of the firm, because I think that's a really important and interesting topic. But let's start with this, wonderful play on words between the office and the firm, and share our thoughts perhaps on what's going on in the world around these two artifacts.
Right. The office, of course, even in the old meaning of the world, is where we work. The office, l'officina, the workplace, rather. So the business house was the workplace. And so office, in a way, was the material representation of the firm. There was no firm without an office. Often, for example, in commerce, without a store or a bench in a marketplace, in the Casbah. So that was the firm. The firm and the office were like one thing and the other, were always together. By the way, I'm now thinking of the firm, but I could also speak about the factory. The factory is also an office where your work, your officium, is different, is not, for example, to write or to think or to discuss, but rather to work with your hands. Again, perhaps a little bit more material, but still. So if we go back, for example, to the remarkable insight of Coase so many years ago, and then the work of Oliver Williamson, when they wrote about the theory of the firm, right? About the theory of why firms exist relative to the marketplace. So why can't we just all sell our services as individuals? My services. Why can't I sell my services as in the market? Why do I need to go to a firm and sign a contract, which actually takes freedom away from me? When I'm in a firm, I have to respect an hierarchy, which is the organizational form of the firm, as opposed to the market. When I go to a marketplace, I don't follow instructions by anyone. I just buy or not buy according to my own will. So I am more autonomous, more free. So we kind of give away a bit of freedom when we become part of a firm. And I think we do that to start with. We'll come back to the knowledge-based view later, because we are giving away a bit of our freedom in exchange for a solid place where we feel safe and we can work productively, because I do think there's some instinctive thing in us that we want to produce something, but that is not just worthwhile, but in a way that is productive. We know that our time on earth is limited. So we don't want to, and actually the more dreams we have, the more material world we want, and the faster material world we want. And for that, we may need to have a space where we can do it without a number of things hitting on us, like cosmic rays, for example. So the firm with a good roof could protect us from those rays, which may actually kill us. So that would be the office. You see, the office is the place where the hierarchy works, where there's a boss, a manager, and where there are employees. By the way, the boss is also an employee to start with most of the time. but where there's this human structure, this group of people that found a way of working together in that place that makes also the place a place where they want to be. Now, of course, there was outsourcing. We can perhaps go back to those things a bit later. But I think that that's a relation between the firm and the office. There was a moment where all these things were together. The office was the firm was the office, and that was the place where you went to work, period. And if you worked through a contract of, for example, service provision, if you were a contracted professional, a freelancer, you could work from home, you could work in the firm, you could work on the beach, you could work anywhere. Because the point was that, and by the way, the only reason then that often people that were quote unquote freelancers or free professionals didn't have to be subject to the hierarchy inside the firm, had to go to the office, because the office where the place was information was. Or the resource they needed to provide their services were there, or a part of them. Now, for example, of course, digital technology has addressed that limitation. I don't need to be in a place to have access to information or data that I require that in the past was there, but now I can have anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. I have two follow-up questions on that. The first one, just staying on the first half of what you just said around that idea of safety, right? Firm, solid, safe, etc. And actually, even Rhea in the audience is asking something similar to what I want us to discuss, which is that I remember from one of the classes I took with you. I never forget it. I always reuse it. The definition of the role of a manager, at least the way I recall it, which may, please forgive me if it's not 100% of what you mean, but how I remember it, is that one of the main roles of a manager is to create, in fact, a safe environment in order to allow those who report into them through this safety to be able to be productive and to be able to create. Because when we feel unsafe, this is almost a Maslow's pyramid problem, but when we feel unsafe, we are not able to be productive, we're not able to create. And in that sense, the physicality of the office also provided a level of that safety. But how do we now exist in a world where so many organizations no longer will be providing that physical safe environment? Does that mean that the burden shifts onto leaders?
Can you explain more what you mean by the burden shift onto leaders?
Meaning, is it now solely management or managing that will create that safe space? Like, I'll take my team as an example. Just, we're dispersed. We don't, you could say this room that I'm sitting in is our headquarters, but that's as far as it goes in terms of like us having a physical space to work from and to, be able to be focused and productive on what we do. In the absence of that physical space, the firm space, is it that the only way to then create the safe environment for my team to work relies on my skills as a leader and a manager?
Yes.
What happens when the artifact disappears, essentially?
Oh, yes, but the point would be, or at least my thesis is, that there are many activities inside the firm that cannot be realized unless people are there and then in that business house. And so the question is, which are those?
Yeah.
Because again, I'm not claiming that everybody has to go to work, everybody has to be part of a firm, and everybody can work only there. No, of course not. Throughout times, this has changed. And of course, technology has a major role. Education has a major role. And quote unquote culture, in the sense of societal culture, has an amazing role. So see, all these big factors have an implication on a particular choice or design, if you will, which is where do we work to do what? When? That's, you see, so that's actually a job for a manager.
Right.
So I think that is the question. We made a lot of assumptions from our past experience and just projected them into the future. And that's very common. It's also very human. We tend to do it that linearly. Right? So our recent experience shapes a bit our quote unquote predictions about the future. And because it worked during the pandemic for many people, not for all people, actually, a lot of people had to go through the anxiety or anguish of leaving home or working with others because we could be safe at home.
For sure.
To start with, meaning there's always people that sometimes in certain circumstances give away something for the others, give in the sense of exchange. I'm not saying that this is a sort of a gratuitous, these activities are gratuitous. I'm just saying that there's still something you are giving. In this case, a bit of your own safety as a person and the caretaker of your family, for example. So the point here really is, when do we decide? Now, the case of your firm, let me put it this way. It's very interesting that you call it your team, and I would call it your firm. But in the case of your firm, you see, your aim, your dream is to, I believe, to make sure that managers in particular, but everybody in general, namely potentially professionals that want to work in their own firm, they really want to have their signature. You know, they want to go back to the individual firma, the individual, and say, this is me, and I'm firm, I'm solid, which is fine. That's actually a firm. But for those that want to do that, you exemplify by being that. You see, you could not kind of understand through experiential knowledge, which is so key here, instead of opinions. You know, there's a lot of people now that have opinions about the future of work. And I find it amazing because they must have a machine, kind of Star Trek machine, because I haven't been able to go to that future. So I don't really know what are the basics. But you are actually doing it. So the more you can do it as a firm, the more you can find out and advise your clients of how to do it. So you see, for me, you have to go through that quote unquote challenge of not being together in one place so that you can show to others and understand better than others who are all in the same place what it is to really work in a remote mode. In this case, all belonging to the firm, but the firm here now is more of an abstraction, and therefore we call, which, by the way, Marilyn, calls for people that can abstract enough to feel that they are in a place, even if they are not. And that's a skill that is not obvious.
I appreciate that. That's really interesting, because when we talk about like what kind of skills you need to have in order to be in a remote organization, there are a lot more tangible skills, but it's the, you know, like you need to be good at writing or whatever it is. But it's very interesting. And the first time I hear this, to actually think that you have to have abstraction capabilities so that you still feel a sense of belonging. Otherwise, you do need the physical cues of the environment to help you. That's a very interesting point. And actually that brings me to like the second half of the question, which you kind of introduced in your response, but it's to say, fine, so we were able to, you know, the first layer of like removing the need to be at the office came with information technology, which meant that freelancers didn't no longer, at least for knowledge work, let's say, you know, work that doesn't involve machines and manufacturing and so on, but for that category of workers to no longer need to be at the office. And you and I have spent some time thinking and discussing, you know, what then is the new function of the office in light of the acceleration, let's say, that the pandemic has provided, in terms of saying like, well, by the way, none of this is new. we could have worked this way 15 years ago. We didn't because no one forced us, and we were just like in that continuation, in the linear process of exploring that work. And now suddenly we've been thrown into an accelerated reality. And so in that case, what then remains in your view, and I'll share a bit about mine, the reasons for which we still, or some people might still want to be in a common physical space.
Right.
And perhaps also because of your extensive experience in kind of global management, I'd love to also have a discussion about the headquarters versus everything else.
Sure. So, well, as you know, Marilyn, but all our friends that are listening to us may not know, because a lot of my work is around the multinational company. And by the way, the multinational company, by definition, is dispersed around the world. It doesn't have one place. It's not a business house.
Mm-hmm.
Although often we think of the headquarters as the business house that kind of controls the rest, which is, again, a not very interesting metaphor because it doesn't translate into reality that well. But so that's because I've studied multinationals for so long and be part of multinationals for so long, that there are some learnings from that experience and from that study and from that experience, mine and others, that can be perhaps useful when we discuss the importance of place. And here really the thing is the importance of place. When do you need to be in a place as opposed to be in a space?
Right.
And now this, for example, is a fascinating discussion in geography. So in the discipline of geography, there's this huge discussion of, is Lisbon, the city where I'm in now, is it a location, is it a space, or is it a place? Is this room in my house, which I turned into a home office, is it a space or is it a place?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is worthwhile, perhaps for all, to at least reflect a little bit, what is the difference?
Yeah.
Because, of course, time can be a metaphor for space. For example, we are meeting at a particular hour, not in a particular room. Mm-hmm. So I'm not there with you in your office. So in the past, when we met to work, for example, we met in a quote unquote space for the time. Let's put it this way. There was a space.
Yeah.
Time was also important, but it came later. So he said, let's meet in my office at 3:00. And now we say, let's meet at 3. And we know it will be by Zoom. Or we say, let's meet at 3 via Zoom or via whatever it is. So the time became first now. Now time is the space where we meet. So we have time as a metaphor of space. Time can be a metaphor of space. No problem. We can meet, because of technology, we can meet in time as opposed to in a space.
Yep.
The question is, but space and place are not the same thing. I mean, I'm not just in a space. I'm in a room of my house. My house is in a building in a particular neighborhood of Lisbon. Lisbon is another wider reality, etc., etc. This is a place. So place is more like not just the space or the location where it happens, a sort of set of GPS coordinates or stuff, but it's everything in it. It's the people in it. It's the history of it. What happened yesterday in my house? What happens perhaps tomorrow that I'm imagining may happen in my house? All that makes the place. And indeed, when we visit another city as a tourism, for example, activity, we also want to see not just the spaces, but also talk with the people, see the people, understand their history, what happened in here, why did this painter painted this here and not there? Why do we have this beautiful sculpture in this square, etc., etc. All that is the place. And so
if you're okay with it,
sorry, yes, go on, sorry.
If you're okay with it, just for also everybody in our audience, I want to read a space versus place definition of a single city, like just as an easy way to represent that, right?
Yes.
So here's an example. So if you're looking at New Orleans as a space, you would say it's a city located in the state of Louisiana in the Southeast United States. It's on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. It's about 350 square miles. It experiences warm, humid climate during most of the year. If you're looking at New Orleans as a place, you would say, it is shaped by the influence of Native American, French, African American, and Spanish cultures. New Orleans is the home of jazz music and spicy Cajun cuisine. The spirit of New Orleans is vibrant, joyful, resilient. It is known as a place where the people are friendly and the party never stops, right? And I think just being able to kind of see tangibly the difference between describing something as a space and describing it as a place, because as you say, in geography, of course, forgetting for a second the idea that time can be a metaphor for space, but in geography, space is the physicality, whereas place is layering on top of that culture, people, emotions, history, and so on. And I think that's a distinction that very few people make today in the discussion around the office. Sometimes people replace workspace with workplace without much thought to what that means. And again, relating a bit to my personal experience, when I try to explain this concept to people, and especially you and I talk a lot about how universalist the approach to remote work is, and how it tries to live in a world where everything is shared across the full spectrum. Like, I think the only thing you and I agree on is universal is human behavior. But I say that when I started my company in Dubai, it ended up creating a different company than if I had started it in France or Brazil. The way I explain it, for example, is that the place Dubai is a very young city. It's 50 years old, and in the span of a very short amount of time, has gone from essentially being a desert, mostly with tribes, no real cultural context, in fact, beyond the tribal culture, to being a place that is incredible. Like, just to watch what someone has been able, or a group of people has been able to build in the span of less than my mother's lifetime. Then as an entrepreneur, because I am in this place, every day that I wake up and I'm not making progress, I feel like I'm already late. And for example, if I had done this in France, which is a slightly, less competitive, we have a lot more, like the socialist system had created a lot more cushioning. Like, there's a lot of things that are part of it. We take more time to think. The French love to analyze for a much longer time than to act. Like, there's also the culture there. I probably wouldn't have built it at the same speed and probably would not have made the same decisions. So for me, I feel very personally the impact of place on my organization. And I'd love for you to speak more on this topic.
Absolutely. So that's absolutely. And using New Orleans, by the way, is a great exemplar of what we're saying, or Dubai, for different reasons. In the case of New Orleans, exactly because of the singularity of the composition of what makes the space a place. In the case of Dubai, because it is an emerging place. And emergence is always an environment where certain kinds of people, not everybody, thrive. Emergence is also very tolling. I mean, being in an emerging environment is very tolling. I mean, it's very, quote unquote, costly for many people, namely those that have less opportunities or lesser power or lesser ability to do certain things, to be up to the speed of the place. So beyond that conversation, let's go back then to the firm, right? To the company, to inside the company. What has happened was that the classic or neoclassic views of economics and management led us to believe, and when I say led us to believe, I mean managers and business schools have been quite an instrument of that leading, to believe that we actually lived in a rational world that could be reduced to a certain number of elements. So reductionism or individualism, as Mario Bunge would say. Reductionism has led us to believe that there are many things that are universal. And, because it's just in a different GPS. And not just are they universal, they can be separated from, for example, the physicality of it or the history of it. Because, the economy and society is stable. It's actually growing. Remember this mania of growth. But growth is not transformation. Growth is not emergence. Growth is growth in the sense that, okay, let's grow 5% next year, 10% next year, 12% next year. But it's always the same. But we just need to grow. Everything is stable. So you don't actually need to be worried. No problem. But at the same time, companies were firing people because of restructuring or because of cost reduction or because of offshoring or because of outsourcing. And so at the same time, people felt that their office was no longer a place. By the way, they started to look all the same. The mania of open space came up in the world. And it's actually not open spaces, because if you go to an open space in certain companies, although the space is open, I've never been in a more closed prison. I mean, the cubicle is actually a cell. People are not even supposed to make noise. They communicate via email at 10 yards of distance. So, and that was made by us, by me, by a manager, let's put it this way, not by some entity that came from outer space. So, yes, we are to blame in that sense. This mania of reductionism, this mania of trying to find the one thing that makes our firm special, we can reduce it to one, our amazing product or vision or whatever. Instead of saying, no, you can't reduce it. You can't reduce the place to a space. Knowledge is context specific. Knowledge depends on the place. What works in New Orleans does not work in Mexico City, for example. And what works in Mexico City does not work in Dubai in many respects. The preferences of individuals are different, or tastes, which, by the way, shapes what they prefer and what gives them a perception of value or happiness. Costs are different. The use of technology is different. The understanding of the world is different. The understanding of the future is different. Actually, the very understanding or perception of space and place are different according to the place. But you see, not in the mind of reductionists, universalists that believe that it doesn't matter. And so that turned companies into spreadsheets, PowerPoints. Yeah. And yes, a spreadsheet is a space, actually, not a place. It's a space where you put numbers and letters, and it's a nice space, actually. By the way, it looks like a series of cells or perhaps a prison, but it's what it is. So I think that's important, that we stop and say, wait a moment, the world is always emerging. Always. There is no stability, really. And I hope the pandemic was enough. And our war in Europe is enough, apart from all the other wars that have been going on in many places, and all the amazing things that we have done, technically speaking or technologically speaking, all the amazing artifacts that we have created, like, for example, the vaccines that kind of reduced so much the impact of the pandemic. So that's what I'm saying. But all these things can't be reduced. They have to be put in context, and the firm needs to be understood not just as a set of contracts, but as a very complex composition of place and people and time, and the society around it, the cultural nature of the place. And then if we start to manage like that, I think it will be a big difference. Then we will start to understand that some functions, some activities need to take place in a place. By the way, we actually say take place in a place. And others do not need that. So why do I say that the future of the office is the future of the firm?
Mhm.
Because if we can be productive, be happy, realize our dreams, professional, personal, human, by working remotely, if we don't need to go to the office, then the firm has no place to exist. Meaning, we don't need firms anymore. Then the firm will disappear, and we will all be, quote unquote, individuals selling and buying our services in the market, which, by the way, will be also virtual.
Yeah.
Right? So I can sell my services to anyone in any country in the world tomorrow. And if everybody can do that, then the firm will disappear. So you see, the future of the office is the future of the firm. And that's why I say we better think twice about that, because there are certain activities and certain elements of what we know that are not universal, that are not location free. And therefore, those will always need us to be together in one place, at least for some periods of time. Apart from the fact, and there are other reasons that we could talk about that would encourage me to be certain of the importance of a place where people go and work together, namely managers. The idea of managing really from home is so obnoxious to me. So, I mean, I'm not managing. I can do what I'm doing because often I'm not managing anyone from home. I would refuse to manage anyone from home. I don't understand how people accept to be managed by people that are at home, their home. I can't even understand how that can be done, really, unless you're managing via PowerPoints and spreadsheets. Where are the other ways we communicate as human beings? How can my energy flow to yours and yours flow to me? How can I feel you if I'm looking to a screen? How can I feel your reaction, your instantaneous, tremor, or your instantaneous delight because of something we thought we're going to do tomorrow to this project, or because we're going to do your project and not another project? And so that's what really puzzles me. Most of what we do as managers, in particular, if we act as in a leading function, has to do with being with others in one place and making that place the place where people want to be to do their work.
I understand that.
If it is boring, if it is unsafe, if the firm is quote unquote something where people that work in it are always worried if they're going to be fired tomorrow and not have enough money to care for their kin or their kids or their grandparents that need now their assistance. So then it's better we don't have firms. Then I can understand why people don't want to go to the firm, because they don't want to go through the pain, right? There is research showing that in many places, the worst time of the day for people is when they go to work. And the second worst time of the day is when they come back from work. But there's also research that shows that according to what we do, the fact that we need to be in a different quote unquote space to think when we work as opposed to when we live at home, going to the office is like crossing a border.
Yeah.
You see, it's very strange to go from one country to another if we don't notice. You see, I cannot be in Madrid, being in Lisbon, but to go to Madrid, I have to go to the travails of the trip, of the travel. I have to go through some space. I have to perhaps stop at the border. But when I stop at the border, like something happens inside me that tells me, okay, I'm now out of my world into a different world. So perhaps now I have to behave a little bit different. I have to think a little bit different. I have to care for others in a different way. It's not the same world. If I don't go through the travel, if I don't go through the border, how do I do that? Again, perhaps if I have an amazing ability to abstract. So perhaps because of our experience, some of us, so I can be here and imagine that I am with you and with those that are listening to us. But I'm not. I'm fully conscious that I'm not. So do I enjoy doing what I'm doing? Actually, personally, not that much, because I like to be with people, because I like to see the reaction to what I'm saying, and to feel that reaction. Anyway, so that's
no. So I was gonna remark on what you said, and then I want us to have the opposite discussion. I'll explain what I mean. So it's very interesting because I think that given my personal experience as an immigrant, I actually have a much clearer idea of how places are different from each other, because I've always had to adapt, as you say, my way of being, what I care about, how I care for others, how I engage with the world around me. I've had to do that many times. And so I understand the difference from one place to another. And interestingly, another example that I give about the importance of geography as well is that I come from a country where you can cross that country in 2.5 hours. So to me, when I first started off there, being in the same country had a very different definition than being in the same country when you're in the US, right? For example, or Russia or India. And so I think that when you travel physically, you start to understand these things very instinctively. And yes, hopefully you have the ability to kind of project, so that now if I'm speaking to somebody somewhere else, I have enough past experience to rely on to at least try to be in their place. But I want to now invert this. We've talked about the impact of place on the firm, but I think that I also want to talk about the impact of firm on a place, because we exist in communities and we exist in places, right? And we have an impact on those environments, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And you and I have been collecting over the past couple of years examples of how firms put their impact on the places and the communities that they are, in my view, responsible for. And we have some historical examples, but we have some more modern ones. Maybe you can start us off with the Mamalu story, because I think it's what started my obsession about this. When you shared the story with me, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, because of how strongly this firm felt the connection to its community and its place of origin. And then I'll also share a few examples that are close to my heart, because we must not ignore that the firm also changes the place in some ways.
Yes. So, for example, if we take the Magazine Luiza, Magalu, this Brazilian company, it's remarkable. The company was created in a quote unquote small, by Brazilian standards, city, a bit far from São Paulo. Mm-hmm. It was a small community, and the company grew a lot there, became a major company in the country there. And of course, it had a very important impact, for example, in the lives of many people there that were working for the company. But the company, of course, was shaped by that place. And although it is in the state of São Paulo, it's a very different place from São Paulo itself. São Paulo is a metropolis. These cities, these beautiful cities in the countryside where people still feel, for example, nature around them because they see it, because their kids play in it, as opposed to seeing asphalt and buildings. But the company, for reasons which have to do with business and with development and so forth, had to bring the headquarters to São Paulo. And what's interesting is that if you go to their headquarters, they replicated in their headquarters the city where the old headquarters, where they remain, by the way, don't misunderstand me. They now have kind of 2 large offices which you could call headquarters, but the one that is formally known as headquarters is now in São Paulo. But when you go there, the names of corridors, the names of offices, the names of the place where they meet regularly every Monday morning as a group, that for us, what people could call a town hall meeting, all these places, all these spaces have names. They turn them into places, and the names are the names of the main square of their original city. The corridors have names of streets in their original city. The offices have names of places or buildings or in their original place. So in a way, I think there was an intuition of Luisa, the CEO at the time, now the chair of the company, that she wanted to bring the place with her to and with the people that were going to work, so that the people that would be hired, say, that were not from their original city, could kind of at least feel have some sort of memory, real memory of what that place was. So I think that that's a very interesting example. We don't have, I mean, unfortunately, examples to be meaningful cannot be said in 10 seconds, but that's one case. Another case, which I think is quite remarkable, is how certain companies like MR, a company that you know extremely well, has been part of creating Dubai as a physical entity through the buildings that they make, that become then famous and kind of illustrate, even symbolize the city. And this was a company, not some strange entity. So an entrepreneur with people at the point of time, you part of that team of leaders that kind of were part of the creation of the city. They just didn't do what customers told them to do. They promoted certain architecture, certain buildings, certain activities, and that was, I think, another example, simple example, of how a company can interact and in a way transform the place and be part of the place. Studies have shown that in Germany, for example, the companies are understood to be relevant and important to their communities.
Right.
Not just to their shareholders, actually first to their communities. And therefore they have to worry with the community because they are part of a community. They are themselves
a community
that comes from that community. So they owe, in their balance sheet, there should be a liability of saying what we owe to the place that made us. For example, Apple should have a big liability in their balance sheet towards Silicon Valley, California, and to the companies that started the Silicon Valley, like HP, which was one of the first companies to develop that place that we now look to with certain admiration, where many people go. Imagine, we don't want to go to the office because it's an hour, boring hour, and some people leave their countries to go to Silicon Valley to be in that place.
That is very true.
And that place was made by companies, actually, and universities and members of government. I mean, managers, leaders. It just didn't come out of some strange phenomenon. So it was managed.
Yeah.
It's an artifact and it's a place. So I wish we could see the firm and the office as a place and not just as a spreadsheet or a set of people. People and place make the firm, not just the people. Let's make sure we understand that. If we believe too much it's only the people, if we reduce the firm or the company to the people and say, oh, it's all about the people. No, it's not all about the people. If it was all about the people, why would you be needed as a manager? The people can do well without you.
They just need a system.
You are supposed to see what individuals have sometimes difficult to see, which is let them worry with what they need to do together and individually. And you, as a manager or leader, you have to worry with the context, with the place where they want to come to work.
Yeah.
Because if people don't want to come to the office, it's telling us about the quality of management, actually. More than anything else, I think.
More than the architecture. I think that's a beautiful conclusion. I almost don't want to add anything to it because it is exactly that level of consciousness, I think, and having this front and center in our thinking that we are. Yes, the firm is people, it's contracts, it's a place, it's culture, it's history. We are hopefully building something that will have itself impact on, like your beautiful example from HP to Apple. You don't know what the impact sometimes is, but suddenly you have built a place from the sheer kind of willpower of the firm to exist and to create an environment around it for others like it, in that case. And I think that to me is a beautiful closing statement, because it also speaks to the power of firms. They are powerful not just in producing hopefully sustainable financial outcomes, but in shaping the world around them in ways that are bigger than maybe sometimes bigger than governments, and as an institution. In that sense, firms don't often see themselves as being institutional, but we have that power, and I think it's something that is both beautiful and something to be reflected on, and for managers to take time to think about that.
Yes, absolutely, Marilyn. I know that we don't have time for that, but perhaps in one other conversation, we could think of companies like Avon in the US or Natura in Brazil, for example, and see how those companies that have used an amazing business model, now misunderstood and forgotten, of direct selling, of door-to-door selling, by the way, of place-to-place selling in a place. How, for example, they were relevant for the autonomy and freedom of women in their society. Because we must not forget that in the late 19th century, when Avon was created, in those days with another name, but that's irrelevant for the time, for the conversation here, they were perhaps the first company that gave large and wide access to women
to work,
to a respected profession that gave them enough money and also sense of autonomy, which, by the way, is part of the American dream. Let's not forget that. It's not just for men. And without Avon, for example, I wonder if a certain kind of social movement would not have been a bit harder, right? Remember, millions of women were involved, not just in being the Avon representatives. They were also the clients of those Avon representatives. And they were mostly women doing business with women. And I think that the women, at least my research has shown, that the women at home at some point saw the representative as kind of a model. If they could be autonomous, if they could get out of home, they could do that too. The same thing in Brazil with Natura, that gave sort of citizens training to the millions of women that have been their consultants over a couple of decades. And that's an amazing, it's not so visible as the buildings of MR, but I would argue it's not only more beautiful, it's surely more relevant for the future. Of course, then you see, if we don't see companies as being entities that do shape the market and do shape the environment, instead of just adapting to it, even the notion that a company exists for managers to adapt to the market. If you adapt to the market, what's your point? Producing a better product or service, is that really a point? And so, but it's also not to solve the world. And now there's a many that companies will solve the world. No, I'm sorry, the companies the firms don't exist for that. But to be great firms, they have to at least shape their place.
Yeah.
If many companies shape their place, that's fine. We don't need a company or two to shape the world. I don't think that.
No. Actually, that would be a little bit terrifying.
Our frailty as humans will lead us to places where we don't want to be. And we even have examples that you and I know well of companies that at some point thought they could dominate the world, and then that doesn't end well, usually.
Never. Wow, that's a beautiful thought. We are shaped by the place, and we shape the place in return. And I think that's a really beautiful place to end this. And hopefully for those who were listening to us today, or whenever they will be listening to us in a few years, who knows, that's a thought that you sit with for a little bit and see what you're doing in order to contribute to that. And with that, Joe, we're coming to the end of this discussion. Although you and I have a continuous, it's a Zoom, I call it a Zoom pal relationship, not a pen pal relationship. But I want to ask you our rapid fire questions, which are statements that I'm going to start and that I want you to complete. Are you ready for those?
Yes, please.
So the first one is great employee experience is
Feeling that you're not an employee.
yeah, I thought you were going to say human experience, so
Well,
close enough. The book, in light of everything we discussed today, I'm sure you have a billion books to recommend, but is there a book that you think every leader should read?
well, you could read indeed one or two books by Zygmunt Bauman.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure, about the liquid world. But I recently read a book that kind of said, yes, 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 we need more academics to do this. And it's from a competing school. So, if I'm saying it's worthwhile, it's probably worthwhile. There's a book by Adam Grant called Think Again.
Yeah.
Think Again, which is basically, the author is trying to promote and show the importance of knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think one of the difficulties we have as managers in the world, and why we have kind of destroyed the goodness and the beauty of an office, of a firm, is because we don't know many things we don't know as managers, and we better know those things. So Think Again, I think, is a nice book. It's also a very well written book. So I think it's a very rigorous book, although being easy to read. I wish I could write like that.
Yeah, that's a really great recommendation. It's also why we call this redesigning the employee experience. Like, it's the same vein of thinking, which is you have to rethink,
Yeah.
The next one is the ideal workplace is?
Well, it's a place where you feel like home, but it's not home.
Yeah. I think you said that last year. I'm going to find the quote because I remember hearing
I say
you say that.
it's a place where home, in theory, is a place where we feel safe, where we want to be, where we go when we're tired. Usually when we go there to be old or to wait for dying. We don't want to do that in a hospital, you see, for example, or in some place. Home is that. Home is a very complicated place, by the way, and it's cultural. Homes in my country are not homes in another country. Sure. I think that if we could just turn a workplace into the home away from home, but a different home, a world where a kind of different life could be lived, I think that would be an amazing workplace.
Okay. And the last one, which is, what is the secret ingredient to a great employee experience? Pick one.
Feeling, again, it's a matter of feeling. It's an experience, right? Feeling that you are in a context, in a place where you can really realize your productive dreams.
I love that.
Of work, of business activity, of professional activity. If that is the secret ingredient, you need to feel that you are in the right place to realize what you want to do. Otherwise, why go there?
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Before we leave everybody on this there's like 7 different moments, or 10 maybe, in today's conversation that I hope people stop on and they take a minute to reflect. Joe, as always, thank you for joining me for another great conversation. This has now become a tradition, I want to say, of the Cosmic Conference. And so I hope that we keep it up for many years to come. And of course, a big thank you to those who joined us or those who will be listening to the session sometime in the future. That's the future of work. Just kidding. But this video is available obviously on LinkedIn for as long as they exist, and then on our YouTube and website. Our next conference session, just before we go, is happening tomorrow at 9 a.m. Dubai time. We're going to be joined by Jonathan Yeo for an interactive session. He's the founder at the Potential Space, and he's going to be talking about asking yourself who you are at work, who you could be, who you want to be, and how you bring your identity into your workplace. He's going to draw on his exploring identity workshops and his research on the nature of identity at work. And in fact, he will be coaching 2 people live that he's never met before around this topic. So it promises to be interesting. As always, our team at Cosmic Centaurs will be grateful if you go on our website, sign up to our newsletter, and make sure to watch our content, because we truly pour our heart and minds into making this content, and we hope that you enjoy it as much as we do. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.